Trinity College's Foundation Studies program has over 30 years' experience preparing international students for success at university. Here's what makes Foundation Studies at Trinity so successful. Firstly, you'll join university-style lectures, as well as smaller tutorials, where you can ask your teachers plenty of questions and bounce thoughts and ideas off other students. The teachers here are what make the program so special. They really care about your well-being and success, just like a friend would. They know their stuff too. They're all experts in their field, and many have years of experience teaching international students, so they'll help make sure you've got the skills and confidence you need to start university.
I found the quality of teaching really good. I found that they were really supportive as well, and they always kept an eye out for you. And because the classes aren't too big, each teacher knows their students, they know their strengths and they know their weaknesses, so they're always able to help you out.
Around 80% of Trinity College graduates get an offer from the University of Melbourne, so your chances of success here are very high. So why don't you join us today at Trinity College, your pathway to the University of Melbourne.
And a very good afternoon to all students who have joined us for tonight's live lecture, the Trinity Talk series that many of you have been tuning into for the past 5 weeks. We've got a fantastic lecture lined up for you this evening. This one is really going to make you think, particularly about how you think. Shortly, I'll be introducing our lecturer, Dr. Alicia. I'll introduce you to her very soon. Before I introduce our lecturer for this evening, I'm just going to share a bit of information about Melbourne. Okay, some of you may have been to Melbourne before. Melbourne, a fantastic city, the best city in Australia to live. Those of you who have visited Melbourne before will know it as a very dynamic, livable city. In fact, it was ranked the #1 city in the world for over 5 years in a row, full of arts, culture, amazing museums, great places to hang out. Now, the reason I mention this is because Melbourne is opening up again. That's right. So this week we will reach 80% double vaccinated in our population. The restrictions are going down. In fact, next week they will be gone, which means people in Melbourne can get out and about once again, back into the cafes, back into the restaurants, hanging out together and catching up. This is a fantastic sign that Melbourne is returning to normal. Now, why do I mention this? Well, for those of you who are thinking about studying somewhere overseas, Melbourne is opening. And in early 2022, we're hoping to bring students back into Australia. We're hoping that in early 2022, students will join us on the campus of Trinity College and the University of Melbourne once again. A fantastic place to study. Australia is returning to normal, and Melbourne University, being the #1 ranked university in Australia, is a fantastic option for international students. If you are interested in how to apply, put a question in our Q&A and we'll tell you exactly what you'll need and what to expect. Okay, so tonight we've got the History of Ideas lecture. The History of Ideas subject is a compulsory subject at Trinity College. Okay, it's a really important subject because it's the subject where we aim to equip students with the skills of critical thinking, analytical thinking, and how to think independently. Tonight, you're going to be taken on a journey on exactly how we do that by one of Trinity College's most senior academics, Dr. Alicia Coram. I'll introduce you very shortly. This is the second last lecture of the series, guys. Those of you who have joined us for the first 5, join us for this one. And next week, the last one, you'll be receiving your certificate of participation. We'll be having that sent out to you as soon as possible. Again, tonight, keep your comments in the chat. Anything to do with the lecture, the topic, commenting or answering questions that our lecturer might pose, put these into the chat. Our lecturer will be monitoring your comments and answers. She'd love to hear from you. These ones go into the chat. As usual, behind the scenes, my esteemed colleague, James Curley. James, are you there? Here he is.
Yes, Ben, good afternoon, and good afternoon to all of the students who've logged in again for tonight or this evening's lecture. Looking forward to it. We're coming to the end, as Ben says. Just remember, comments to do with the content of tonight's talk and communications with Dr. Alicia in the chat, please. Anything else, any of the general stuff to me in the Q&A. Just remember, Dr. Alicia won't be looking in the Q&A. So if you're answering one of her questions, only I will see it.
Very good. Thank you, James. And as always, students, James will be in the background answering all of your questions. How to apply, why Melbourne University is always the #1 university and the best place to study in Australia. Anything to do with that, put it into the Q&A. Other comments about the lecture, put them into the chat. As always, guys, keep the chat relevant. Stay focused, please. I can see people saying hello. I'm going to say one hello to all of you. Welcome. And let's get on with tonight's lecture. The chat, keep it respectful, keep it in English, keep it focused. Okay, guys, I'm going to hand over to our lecturer for this evening, Dr. Alicia Coram, Senior Lecturer in History of Ideas. Are you there, Dr. Alicia? Fantastic. Alicia,
Hello, everybody. Hi, nice to have so many of you here. Thanks, everybody, for coming to listen to tonight's lecture.
Alicia, we've got, well, we're heading towards 450 students from all over the world, from Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Myanmar. We've got students from China, Bangladesh, and even further afield. This is what it's like at Trinity College, students from all over the world. Dr. Alicia, I'm going to hand over to you. Have a fantastic lecture. Students, enjoy this one. Stay focused because here it comes. I'll see you at the end for a Q&A.
Thank you very much for that, Ben. So I'll start by, I'll share my slide so you can see what we're going to be talking about tonight. So the lecture that I will be delivering for you tonight is about how to not know. How to not know, which might be a bit surprising because you're probably thinking if you come to Trinity College, it will be about what you will find out, how you will know. But I'm hoping to convince you that not knowing is a very important step on your journey to be good knowers. So my name is Dr. Alicia Coram. I have been teaching for over 20 years, and the last 7 years I've spent at Trinity College, which has been a fantastic experience meeting people from all over the world and indulging in some of my passions for thinking about ideas. So I'm a lecturer and tutor in the history of ideas. The history of ideas is not like the kind of history subjects that you might have taken before in school. The history of ideas is very much a cross-disciplinary subject, and we're really about introducing and critically analysing ideas, thinking about ideas, thinking about what they mean, what their value is, how they developed, thinking about them within the context, the historical context that they came about. And we think about some of the really important fundamental ideas for understanding our world and for understanding the Western world in particular. So the history of ideas is a really exciting way for you to start developing those skills of analysis and independent thought. And we look at ideas throughout the history of the Western world, from ancient Greece right up to the contemporary world, to ideas about colonization, feminism, all sorts of really interesting concepts that you get to explore. And as Ben mentioned, a really central part of the History of Ideas subject is thinking about some of these skills of analysis and critical thinking and helping you to become independent thinkers. So becoming independent thinkers is a really important skill to develop that will ensure your success in any university subject that you're interested in, whether that be something like science or accounting or economics or marketing or arts. All of them are really interested in students who can apply their thinking critically and independently. And what I've got on screen at the moment, this is something called Bloom's taxonomy. And this is a way that many people think about developing different skills in education. And this is often used to develop subjects and develop assessment within subjects. And as you can see, as we move up the pyramid, when we look at something like evaluation, this is a skill to do with judging the value of information or ideas. So it's about being able to break things apart and to weigh up their value. And in the history of ideas, thinking about how they might connect to their historical context as well. So today's lecture is going to hopefully help you understand a little bit about how not knowing, how thinking about uncertainty and valuing feelings of doubt is actually really important for you to become a better thinker. So my background in philosophy has meant I've spent a lot of time studying things that are quite difficult and that there are no settled right answers to. Things like consciousness, ethics, these hard questions. And one thing that I really enjoy about that is the need to engage with some of these difficult ideas and to embrace the feeling that there is still uncertainty and there are still things to find out, that we can't always be certain of having a right answer. And this is something a lot of students have told me that they really enjoy about History of Ideas, being able to explore things without just looking for the right answer. So I'm going to suggest that there are 3 steps that you might take to be a good not knower. And the first thing is learning to value this feeling of doubt. So I'm sure you have all felt doubt at some point in your life, whether that's in your education or in other parts of your life. And that feeling of uncertainty and doubt can be really uncomfortable. It can be something that we want to move away from. And particularly if you're coming to study at Trinity or go on to university, you are probably thinking that being a good student, we often think about being a good student is about being certain in our knowledge, about knowing the right answer to questions. So when we feel uncertain or doubtful, we might want to move away from that as quickly as possible and try and get to a point where we know the right answer to a question. But in fact, that's sometimes not the way to be a good thinker. Sometimes it's not about rushing away from uncertainty, but exploring it. And this idea of actually embracing and exploring and seeing the worth in feelings of doubt or uncertainty is something that led, for example, the poet, the 19th century romantic poet John Keats, to develop a concept that he called negative capability. So a good way to value something is to actually see that thing as a capacity or an ability. And John Keats talked about negative capability in terms of an ability to suspend our judgment, to be comfortable within that space of doubt or uncertainty or even mystery, as a way to, for him, become more creative in our thinking. So he valued that capacity to be able to sit in that space of doubt or uncertainty. And another thinker that I think many of you have recently been talking about, if you came to the lecture on physics by Dr. Paulo, is Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman is a Nobel Prize winning, or was a Nobel Prize winning physicist, and he very eloquently expressed the importance and significance of uncertainty and doubt when it came to being a good thinker and a good student. So he said, when we know that we do actually live in uncertainty, this is the reality of our situation, we ought to admit it. And this is of great value. This is going to actually help us to find answers to different questions. And he advocated actually developing and focusing on this attitude of uncertainty. He talked about how uncertainty and the ability to be uncertain was absolutely vital for good science. And that this was something that, in order to be a good student, you needed to acquire almost as a habit of mind to be able to be uncertain and recognize your uncertainty. So rather than retreating from it, we actually actively move towards it. So given that this is history of ideas, you won't be surprised to know that the next step that I would suggest for people who would like to become good not knowers is to learn from some of the thinkers in history that have embraced doubt and have used doubt and uncertainty in order to further their thinking. Some of you might be familiar with this philosopher. This is a philosopher from ancient Greece. And if you come and study with us, you'll learn about some of these ancient Greek philosophers. And this is Socrates. And famously, Socrates claimed that the unexamined life is not worth living. What he meant by this was that if we were going to have a good, meaningful, fulfilling life, that we needed to examine how we thought about ourselves. We needed to examine our knowledge. We needed to examine what we thought about the concepts that were important to us about what it was to have a good life, the meaning of justice, the meaning of beauty. And we needed to really think about what we actually did know and question ourselves in order to become people who were living a much better life, to lead a good life. And this idea of using questioning and doubt as a path to having a good life is something that was also embraced by a school of philosophy in ancient Greece, ancient skepticism. And you might recognize that word skepticism. We use that term skepticism to mean doubting. When we're questioning knowledge, when we doubt somebody's claim, we are being skeptical. And it comes from these ancient thinkers. The term skepsis is actually a Greek term meaning investigation. So the ancient skeptics were about investigating knowledge. And they claim that we actually cannot know the true nature of things. So because of that, it's necessary for us to suspend our judgment. And for the skeptics, they believed that this would lead us to peace and tranquility, that this was actually a pathway to a peaceful life, to fill ourselves with doubt. So both Socrates and the skeptics saw doubt as a pathway to actually having a good life. This was essential for them. But the doubter that I'm going to be focusing on for the most part tonight is one of the most famous philosophers of doubt in Western history, and this is René Descartes. Now, Descartes believed that doubt was a path to certain knowledge. And as we'll see, it helped him develop new theories about the mind, about who we are and what it is to think and what the nature of what human nature is like. And this in turn has really shaped the way people think about humanity and questions like whether we could ever upload ourselves into a computer. Are we minds that can exist without a physical form? These are all questions that Descartes was led to through his use of doubt. So let's have a little bit more of a look at some of Descartes' ideas. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to participate and ask you some questions that Descartes would pose to you. So René Descartes was writing at a really crucial and interesting point in Western history. So he was writing in a period known as the early modern period. And this was a period that took in the Renaissance and also the scientific revolution. So it was a period where people were questioning knowledge that they had previously held to be true. So during the medieval period, we had the authority of the church and also the authority of ancient thinkers that had been essentially unquestioned. So the church and thinkers like Aristotle were seen to hold the answers to questions about the natural world. But during this period, people began to conduct experiments, to observe, and also people from Western Europe were traveling, they were exploring new territories and finding out new information and new ways of thinking that made them question the authority of people like Aristotle and the church. The problem is, if you start questioning authorities that you have trusted to be people or books or thinkers that deliver you with knowledge and with certainty, if you question them, you have to make sure that whatever it is that you are replacing that system with is better, that this will actually deliver more certainty. And this is what Descartes was trying to do. Bonjour, says Descartes, being French. So his idea was that in order to reach certain knowledge, the path to this was to, in fact, doubt everything that we could possibly doubt. Only then, thought Descartes, if we looked at all of the beliefs and the things that we held to be true, and if we examine them all and look to see if it's at all possible logically for us to even question that that is correct. And he thought if we got rid of all of those beliefs that it was even possible to doubt, what we would be left with would be absolutely certain knowledge. And then we could build up a system of knowledge that would be more certain than ever before. So what I'd like to invite you to do is, first of all, to think about, what do you think you are absolutely certain is true? So maybe a couple of you would like to put in the chat, is there something that you feel 100% certain this is definitely true? So if anybody would like to join in at this point, the earth is round. That's a good one. Thank you, Kanika. Aliens exist. I like that one a lot. I don't know whether everybody would agree with you, but I like your certainty that aliens exist. Anything else that people feel confident that they would say, no, I'm pretty, this is absolutely true. The earth is round. Aliens exist. I think we can definitely doubt that. Humans need oxygen to live. Thank you, Olivia. We are humans. That might be a piece of knowledge that you feel certain about. The world is continuously getting chaotic. It's very interesting, different perceptions of whether the world tends towards order or chaos. Fish need water to live. The sun rises from the east. All living things must die. Ah, now Hanson, you've been a bit clever there. I'm going to leave yours till a bit later on, because I think this is something Descartes might be interested in. So we could generate a lot of different beliefs and things that we feel like we know. I feel like I know that I'm sitting here delivering a lecture right now. I feel like I know that 2 + 2 = 4. But Descartes will ask us to take each of these beliefs, so the ones that people have put here, ghosts exist, that's a good one, or all living things must die, or I'm giving a lecture right now. And Descartes will ask us, can we even logically possibly doubt that thing? And the first thing he will tell us is that any belief that we have, where the evidence that we have for that belief is our senses, is from our experience, cannot be certain knowledge. So let's have a little think. The sun rises from the east. How do we know that? Well, one way we might know that is from our observations. or even the collected observations of many people across a long period of time. How do I know that I'm here giving a right now? Well, I feel like I'm sitting in a chair. I can hear my own voice in my head. And Descartes will tell us that every single belief that we have that is based on that kind of evidence from our senses, it is at least possible for us to doubt. Can anyone think why? Why do we have to, according to Descartes, get rid of all of those beliefs if we want certain knowledge? What is it about our senses that Descartes is going to tell us means that we can question those beliefs? Does anyone have any ideas? Why can we question our senses? Yes, our perception. So what we see, what we taste, what we feel, what we hear. Why is Descartes saying we can doubt that it's possible to doubt those? Why? Does anyone know? Could be because there's more. So somebody suggested there's more than one outcome to any situation. So that might be a reason for doubting. He has something even more fundamental in mind when it comes to beliefs that we have that are based on our senses, based on sensory information. Naomi has suggested, and this is absolutely one reason, sometimes our senses are affected by our beliefs. So we can kind of change what we see or what we hear or based on what we already believe. We also just know that our senses can deceive us. You have probably all seen optical illusions. There are various ways that we can have auditory illusions, optical illusions. So our brain, as Himesh noted, sometimes lies to us. So Descartes said, because of this, it means if we want absolute certainty in our knowledge, we have to rid ourselves of all of those beliefs that are based in our senses. These are what you might refer to as empirically based beliefs. So he says we have to get rid of that. The other thing he points out is that we often dream. And in our dreams, we often believe that we are experiencing reality. So we can have optical illusions or other sensory illusions. We can dream and feel like we're in the real world when we're not. So Descartes says we have to get rid of all of those beliefs. They're gone. They cannot form the basis, the foundation of certain knowledge. We might still be left with some other beliefs, however. So if we think about what beliefs do we have that are not based on our sensory information? So we might think about things that are true by definition. So if you know that the definition of the word bachelor is unmarried male, and I tell you that Ben is a bachelor, you might say, well, I know that Ben is unmarried because I've got this definition. Mathematics, many of you might be passionate about mathematics, you might really love mathematics, and you might feel that you can be very certain that 2 + 2 = 4. Or we might think that we can be very certain about logical truths like something is identical to itself. Descartes is also going to suggest that nearly all of these beliefs, it is possible for us to doubt. How? Well, he says it's possible for us to be mistaken about these laws of mathematics or logic. And his example of how this could happen is, how do I know that there is not an evil demon? We're getting close to Halloween, so maybe this is a pertinent thought. How can I be sure that there isn't an evil demon who is tricking me and deceiving me and making me think that I know the laws of mathematics or logic, but I'm actually mistaken? His example of an evil demon has been actually updated many times in many different stories, many different movies who have used his ideas. Today, we might think about an evil neuroscientist. What if a neuroscientist could manipulate our brains and make us believe certain things that were true that were not. Or perhaps there are sentient robots that want to harvest our body as an energy source, and they tap into our minds and make us believe that we're living in the real world and that 2 + 2 = 4 when it's false. That's not Descartes' idea, by the way. Some of you might recognize that idea from a movie, a very old movie now called The Matrix, but they are making a new version of this movie. It's a really interesting idea, and this has been the basis for movies like The Matrix, like the movie Inception. So this is where Descartes ends up. He says, if we look at each of our ideas and we ask ourselves, is it possible for us to doubt that the things that we think are true are really true? He says we can doubt everything. The only thing, he says, we cannot doubt is this: I think, therefore I am. So he says if we examine every belief we have, this is the only one that we are left with as a certainty. Why? Well, just try and doubt that. If you try and doubt that you think, therefore you are, then you're just confirming that you think, therefore you exist. We cannot logically doubt that. And he says that is the only thing we cannot doubt. So for Descartes, nothing apart from that is certain. This is where he's led with his doubt. Actually, Descartes takes his argument in a different direction. For Descartes, he also believes that we can know for certain that God exists. And he also believes that we can know that God would not deceive us in this way like an evil demon. So Descartes then goes on to build up more things that he believes that we can be certain about, particularly rules and laws of mathematics. And you might have even noticed his name Descartes. This is Cartesian. So when we think of Cartesian planes and mathematics, this is where it comes from. However, many people are not convinced by that part of his argument. And many philosophers for years and years afterwards were trying to engage and disprove Descartes' skeptical argument that we couldn't know anything for certain apart from I think, therefore I am. So his legacy is much more about that basis of his argument. From that, Descartes went on to develop a particular idea about the nature of this I, whose existence we cannot doubt. So the next thing we note about this is we can doubt that we have a body. So I can doubt that I have 2 hands, that I'm a certain height. I can doubt all of these things because my evidence comes from my senses. What I can't doubt is that I have a thinking mind. So this leads Descartes to suggest that the mind and the body are actually different things. So when I say I think, therefore I am, the I, the self, is a thinking thing. It is not the body. So the body, says Descartes, is different from the mind. The body, he says, is extended in space the way other physical things are, and it is non-thinking. The mind is infinite and it is thinking. So the image you have on the screen here, this is actually something called an automaton. This is from a little bit later than Descartes' time, but it indicates how he thought of bodies and how he thought of non-human animals, in fact. So as you can see, it's a piece of mechanical clockwork. It's like a very early robot, a very simple robot. It's around the time of Descartes, a little bit later than him. But he would be familiar with these kinds of mechanical automatons. Some of them were run on water and on pumps that move them, or on, other things moving back and forward, but quite simple mechanics. And this is essentially what he thought of bodies. These kinds of mechanical things that could perform sort of limited range of motions that would have to be determined in various ways. But Descartes pointed out that human beings are actually capable of infinitely many complex behaviours, humans only for Descartes. The example he's particularly interested in here is language. So he says that our capacity for language is infinite. We could come up with infinitely many sentences, many of which nobody would have ever uttered before. And he thinks that it would not at all be possible for a physical machine to ever generate that level of complex behaviour, because machines are physical things and they are limited in their behaviours. So he believed that our language and our complex behaviours were actually driven by this mind. And for Descartes, this is also a soul. So animals and even our bodies are like machines, but humans have this special thing which is not physical, our mind. So Descartes argues that our mind and our body are completely distinct substances. They have different qualities, they're independent of each other. So this leads us to think, well, do we believe Descartes here? Do you think that your I could exist without your body? So what do you think? Could you exist without your body? And what might be why or why not? So do you believe that yourself could exist without your body? And you can answer if you'd like in the chat. So a few people, yes, maybe. And I think we do sort of feel like when we think about who we are, what we are, we often associate that with our thoughts and our minds. Do you think that you could upload your mind into a computer? So if you think it's possible that you could exist without your body, could we take your mind and reproduce it in some other thing that was not your physical body? So I've had a few people thinking yes, and I believe this is actually, I think, a reasonably common way of thinking of ourselves, which is almost a bit like Descartes, that this I that we feel so attached to is actually a non-physical thing. So a few of you think this is possible. We've got Sharon saying, I would say that it is I utilising my body to fulfil the willings of I. So this is, again, there is a distinction. Maybe if you didn't have this body, your I could exist in another body, or in a robotic body, or a computer. But if they are separate, we might then find some other problems that we have to think about. So for example, if our mind is separate from our body, how does our mind tell our body what to do? How do they interact? So this is another philosophical question that comes out of Descartes' understanding of the mind and body that he was led to through doubt. And if we take a more contemporary way of understanding this, we could turn this around. So if we think that our selves, our minds could exist without our body, could we also make a mind from a machine? Could a machine or a robot ever really think? So Descartes, remember, said no. He said machines, these purely physical bodies and machines, they alone cannot think. It's not our body that thinks, it's our mind or our soul. So he says no to this. But we saw before the kinds of machines he had in mind. They were very simple. So Descartes never saw a chess playing computer. He never realized, I found out actually I think it was last month, they got a computer to complete one of Beethoven's symphonies. So you can hear a computer-generated version of Beethoven's symphony. We know that there are chess-playing computers who have beaten grandmasters. Does that mean that they are thinking? Does that mean that they are thinking machines? Is that what it takes to think? So this leads us to these questions of artificial intelligence. What would be required for us to say that a computer or a machine was intelligent, was a thinking thing? What would lead us to say that Descartes was wrong, that it was possible to have a machine, a purely physical machine with a mind? So I'm going to play you a brief clip here about something called the Turing test. For those of you who are interested in computing and computers and robots, you might have heard of the Turing test before. And Alan Turing, who came up with this idea, was one of the founders of modern computational theory. So he's an incredibly significant thinker who actually worked on code breaking during World War II. So we'll play a short clip explaining how Alan Turing approached this question of, could we ever have a thinking machine? So.
What is consciousness? Can an artificial machine really think? Does the mind just consist of neurons in the brain, or is there some intangible spark at its core? For many, these have been vital considerations for the future of artificial intelligence. But British computer scientist Alan Turing decided to disregard all these questions in favor of a much simpler one. Can a computer talk like a human? This question led to an idea for measuring artificial intelligence that would famously come to be known as the Turing test. In the 1950 paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, Turing proposed the following game. A human judge has a text conversation with unseen players and evaluates their responses. To pass the test, a computer must be able to replace one of the players without substantially changing the results. In other words, a computer would be considered intelligent if its conversation couldn't be easily distinguished from a human's. Turing predicted that by the year 2000, machines with 100 megabytes of memory would be able to easily pass his test. But he may have jumped the gun. Even though today's computers have far more memory than that, few have succeeded. And those that have done well focused more on finding clever ways to fool judges than using overwhelming computing power. Human language turns out to be an amazingly complex phenomenon that can't be captured by even the largest dictionary. Chatbots can be baffled by simple pauses like, or questions with no correct answer. And a simple conversational sentence like, I took the juice out of the fridge and gave it to him, but forgot to check the date, requires a wealth of underlying knowledge and intuition to parse. It turns out that simulating a human conversation takes more than just increasing memory and processing power. And as we get closer to Turing's goal, we may have to deal with all those big questions about consciousness after all.
Okay, so there are some additional questions raised by that. Would it be possible to have a computer that acted sufficiently like a human? And what would that mean if we created that kind of artificial intelligence? Maybe that's not the kind of thing that we want to do with our artificial intelligence. Maybe we don't want to create a mind that's like a human's. But would we want to say that another mind was just as important or significant as a human mind? Would we need to create consciousness in order to have intelligence? So somebody's commented here, that's why the human brain is unique. And this leads us to think about, why is it unique? What is it about how we think that makes it so difficult for us to actually create a computer that can even fool somebody in conversation into thinking that they are a human? And as many of you are probably aware, the idea of artificial intelligence is now being used to try and, for example, create self-driving cars. And this raises a lot of ethical questions. How would we program a computer, a self-driving car, to make the kinds of ethical decisions that human drivers have to make if, for example, they're faced with an accident? Somebody here, Himesh, has commented that computers are restricted in a lot of ways, unlike us. And I think that's absolutely true, Himesh. I think the opposite is true too. We are limited in ways that computers are not. So all of these kinds of ethical questions and questions about what we can know about the human mind when we explore these ideas of artificial intelligence and thinking leads us back to that kind of questioning, doubting, uncertainty. We have to approach these ideas knowing that we might need to question our own underlying assumptions about the nature of ourselves, the nature of our minds. And this was actually what really fascinated me and led to my research when I did my PhD. And I became very interested in another theory that has arisen about the mind that questions the very assumption that our minds are actually things that exist within, usually people think of our minds within our head, or that they are our brains or somehow connected to our brains. The theory I got interested in was something called the extended mind theory, that our minds actually spill out into the world and into other people. And this, I found, just completely undid a lot of the assumptions that I had that I didn't even realize I was thinking with these assumptions about the nature of myself and the nature of the mind. So some of you might like to stay back after if you wanted to ask some more questions or engage in a bit more conversation about that idea of thinking machines. So when we've looked at some of our thinkers in history, we first had a quick look at the ancient Greeks and saw how some of the thinkers in that, such as Socrates or some of the skeptics, used doubt as a path to a good life, as a path to wisdom or to mental tranquility. And we just saw how Descartes took that idea of doubt and pushed it to the most extreme point possible, where he believed we could doubt everything apart from that claim that I think, therefore I am. But from that, he generates a whole concept of the nature of I, the nature of the human self. So the third step in how to not know is also to think about how not to not know. So one thing you'll notice about our doubters that we've thought about so far is that this is not a lazy path. To be a not knower is not about being ignorant or ignoring things. It actually requires you to engage quite a lot and to think quite a lot. And there are better and worse ways of not knowing. One of the things that many of you will know is that the basis for modern science is in fact doubt. And we saw Richard Feynman talking about this. The whole idea of scientific knowledge is based on doubt, is based on being able to question and test and prove our ideas and theories. But this idea of doubt is sometimes misused. So science is based on doubt and good questioning, and it has been called a form of organized skepticism. So the whole collective of science is about being skeptical about everybody's knowledge and to test it further and further and it's designed to get closer to the truth. So what we call scientific knowledge would be a consensus. It's not the same as the certainty of knowledge that Descartes was talking about. So scientific knowledge is not impossible to doubt. In fact, it's the opposite. You should be able to doubt it and test it. So scientific knowledge is a consensus built on this collective scrutinizing of evidence and the evidence for claims that people are making. So if you actually arrive at a consensus amongst scientists about some claim, that actually is a very strong indication of that claim being a very foundational claim, being quite close to the truth. It's very difficult to achieve scientific consensus. And it's something that people often don't recognize. So to indicate somewhere where there is something that is known as a consensus gap, and that means a gap between the degree of certainty or consensus that the public think exists and the actual consensus amongst scientists. And this exists in the area of climate change. So the public, in various polls, the public believe generally that probably just over half of climate scientists agree about global warming, that our planet is warming and that this is caused by human activity. So that's the perception of the degree of consensus within the scientific community. The actual consensus within the scientific community is about 97%. Some put it even higher, some put it slightly lower, but about 97% of climate scientists agree on some of the fundamental facts of global warming. Given that science is all about questioning and testing and trying to actually disprove theories, that is a very significant consensus. However, there are people who deliberately try to use the legitimate doubt that comes with testing scientific knowledge and exaggerate that doubt to try and erode people's confidence in that scientific consensus. And there is a book and a documentary called Merchants of Doubt, where the authors explored particular groups of people that deliberately use the tactic of amplifying or exaggerating scientific uncertainty as a means to further their own agenda or ends. And this was very obvious in the context of tobacco. So most people would understand now that tobacco smoke is carcinogenic, including secondhand smoke for people who aren't directly smoking, but other people that might inhale it, and that nicotine is addictive. And in fact, this has been known for quite a long time. There's been a scientific consensus on this for a long time. But for example, in the 1950s, we found the presidents of 4 large tobacco companies in America, and there is evidence of them actually cooperating with each other to create a public campaign that was entirely focused on casting doubt on that scientific consensus. So they were weaponizing doubt and uncertainty. And what they did was that they made use of some of the legitimate aspects of doubt that you get in science. So for example, they cherry-picked certain data and they really focused on and amplified anything that was unexplained or any areas where there was any disagreement between scientists. They also funded science that might benefit them. It might not always benefit them, but they would put money into science that might actually disprove claims that they thought were true. And in fact, this is ongoing. So in 1994, and this is where this image comes from, the CEOs of 7 major tobacco companies in America stated under oath that nicotine was not addictive. Very clearly, nicotine is addictive, and there is a very strong scientific consensus about this. And the authors of the book, The Merchants of Doubt, note that exactly the same strategies, and in some cases exactly the same people, are involved in attempting to cast doubt on the climate change consensus. So trying to exaggerate the uncertainty, trying to indicate or to fund those scientists who those very small amount of scientists who might not fit that 97% consensus. And they're doing this in order to slow government and individual action. And often they are people who are, for example, connected to the fossil fuel industry or might otherwise benefit from halting progress on tackling climate change. And this is where we get to that question of the ethics of doubt. What is good doubt, and when is doubt harmful? So doubt is not something that we should be using to avoid making decisions in the face of some kind of uncertainty. So as Descartes has showed us, getting absolute 100% logically impossible to doubt certainty, there is hardly anything left if we tread that path. So we shouldn't use doubt to try and avoid making decisions in the face of uncertainty when there is trustworthy and credible reason to follow a certain path. And the other thing to note there is that if we doubt, for example, a scientific consensus on climate change, that is kind of equivalent to not doubting the people who are casting uncertainty or are climate change deniers in this instance. So not believing one thing often equates to supporting the opposite. So this is just a warning about how we have to be doubtful about our own doubt and where doubt comes from. And there are some questions that we can ask if we are thinking whether the doubt that we have is good doubt or not. These are not perfect, but they're guides to doubting well. Think about how strong the claim is that you're doubting. Think about the evidence for that claim, whether it is reasonable doubt. How much evidence, where does it come from? Don't use doubt to avoid making decisions. Are you using doubt, or is a group using doubt to try and avoid an uncomfortable truth or avoid committing to some kind of decision? And you might also consider the motivations of the group or the person who is casting doubt on certain claims. Are they using doubt to further their thinking, to further understand the world, or are they using it to benefit or harm a particular group? So that can help us to think about how not to not know. So the very last thing I just wanted to finish up on was why? Why should we not know? And at the very beginning of the lecture, I talked about how embracing ideas of uncertainty and not knowing can actually lead us to become better critical thinkers and better independent thinkers. It can lead us to deeper understanding. We saw how following Descartes' doubt helped us to think more clearly, perhaps, about what we thought about ourselves and our own minds. So it can be a pathway to deeper understanding and to creative thinking. It also really forces us to look at the evidence we have for our beliefs. So Descartes talked about evidence from our senses versus evidence from our reason. We can think about how much evidence there is, how strong our evidence is, and whether we are in a good position to feel certain about the things that we believe we understand. But there was also a warning that doubt is not a reason for inaction or for giving up on thinking hard. And learning to actually appreciate that feeling of being able to pursue and be confident in your skills of pursuing questions and doubting, even when there is not one clear right answer, or you might never get to a point where you're 100% certain about something. This is a really important skill, not just for history of ideas, but for life in general. So I hope you have enjoyed some thinking about thinking and thinking about how not to know. And I might have a few more questions in a minute. I'll see how that runs. Thanks, Ben.
Fantastic. Dr. Alicia, wow, so much to think about there, and an amazing lecture. Students, we love to run a question and answer session at the end of these lectures. Raise your hand if you would like to ask a question or propose something, or even doubt something that has been said tonight. Put your virtual hand up and I'll select you. Before I choose the first student here, Dr. Alicia, many of the students with us tonight might be thinking about studies in science or engineering, or maybe even business and accounting. Can the skills that we're talking about, or the ability to question and doubt, how important is it across all of the disciplines?
I think it's absolutely fundamental, and we've had conversations with people from all of those departments at the University of Melbourne and looked at what they want from their students. And it is about that independent thinking and the ability to look at information, to critically analyse it, to think about the kind of assumptions behind things, and to question them and to innovate, to do things better as well. So all of those disciplines are really keen to have students that can develop those independent thinking skills. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And look, a lot of the schools that we visit all around the world, and many parts of Asia, students often rely on picking up their pens, listening to the teacher, and copying and memorizing, which is a great way to learn a bunch of facts. But when students go on to university, of course, they need to do more than that, and they need to employ these skills, don't they?
You have to be able to do something. So I think skills of memory are absolutely important and wonderful, but you have to be able to do something with the information. And particularly now, we all have access to so much information. The problem is not getting information. It's about being able to assess the information. It's about being able to do something with the information, put two and two together, think about connections, think about what makes logical sense, and to actually analyze and go further with that rather than just repeat things that you might find. Yeah, absolutely essential. Fantastic.
Look, let's take a couple of questions here. We've got a student who puts his hand up every week here, Dr. Alicia.
Love it.
I'll let him lead the way with the questions. Tu Tao from Vietnam. I've turned your microphone on. Go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. I have a question is, how do I know I'm not the only one that is conscious being in the whole universe? Like, you are experiencing your own mind every second, but you can only infer the existence of other minds through indirect means. Is other people seem to pose conscious perception, emotion, memory, and intention just as you do, but you can't sure they do. You can guess how the world look to me based on my behavior and utterance, including the words you are hearing, but you have no first-hand access to my inner life.
Fantastic. I love it. We have a natural philosopher here. I really hope that you turn up and that you're in my class. So the questions that you're asking are they're philosophical questions, essentially. So the position that you're describing is a position known as solipsism, that it's possible that I am the only mind in the universe. And if we think about Descartes' argument, he says, I think, therefore I am. But that doesn't necessarily get us to a point of certainty that there are other thinking things. So when we're talking about these knowledge claims, one thing is we might want to think about what bar are we holding ourselves up to. So if we want to go for the really hard line like Descartes saying, is it possible to doubt that there's any other thinking thing in the universe? It seems possible. However, when I'm more coming from a contemporary position in philosophy of mind, and people are very interested in the social aspect of how we even develop our sense of ourself. And many philosophers now think that even developing a concept of I is very much based on our social interactions and the way in which we are embedded within a society, that we're raised by other people, that we're responding to other people as social beings, and that is actually absolutely fundamental to what the self is. Does that give us the certainty of Descartes saying, you know, it's impossible to doubt that? No. But I think once we move away from that, there's, you know, understanding who we are, I think, is impossible without understanding ourselves as one among many. I'm not sure if that fully answered your question, but.
Well, that could be the topic of a full lecture at Trinity College too. Thank you for your questions. They're always very well thought out. And I'm sure that when you come to Trinity College for the foundation program, you're going to have a whole lot more. And fantastic. We've got Himesh next, who's been with us for all of the lectures. Dr. Alicia, I'll allow him to talk. Himesh, go ahead with your question.
Good evening. I hope everyone's all right. I just want to ask a very simple question. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone today, but across the years from your research, who would you assume has reshaped our perception of, with regards to anything, whether it be reality, with how we think of a certain situation, how we believe programming, or how our anatomy works? Who would you assume, I mean, in your opinion, has reshaped our perception the most?
Oh, that's a great question. Really hard to answer. I will tend to always answer that question depending on who I'm researching at the time. So one person that comes to mind at the moment in our July comprehensive, we're looking at the work of Francis Bacon, who was a very early pioneer of the scientific method and thought about the role of experiment, for example, and how we needed a method to direct our minds in a way that would be more reliably produce truth. There are so many though, and one thing I love about history of ideas is you get to kind of experience these kind of moments in history. As I said, the thing that really sparked me to think about my thesis was people who were philosophically questioning that idea that our minds are something that is personal to ourselves, that these are internal things as opposed to a process, a mental process that extends beyond us into the world. So for me personally, thinkers that have gone down that path, and a contemporary thinkers, for example, like Andy Clark, has been really influential. But certainly in philosophy, there's been many, many thinkers who have really turned our assumptions about the world and how it operates on its head. Whenever I go back to the ancient Greek thinkers like Plato or Aristotle, I'm always finding new things in them and finding ways in which, you know, Plato, for example, people often say that all of Western philosophy is footnotes to Plato, that really he came up with some of the most influential kind of ideas, and that everybody since then has just been trying to grapple with the concepts that he came up with about our minds, about our political systems. So I know I haven't really answered your question. I can't pick a favorite, but there are many, many interesting thinkers, I think, who have changed our perceptions.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Dr. Alicia. Let's take a couple more questions. We've got one from May Tanumi Harja from Indonesia. May, I'll open your microphone now. Go ahead, May.
Hi, good evening, Dr. Alicia. I just have one question about people who are less open-minded to the fact that, you know, we should doubt things because they'll say that we as humans have emotions too, and we should also consider that in our way of thinking. So do you have any ideas about how to tell the people that are very close-minded about these things and how to convince them that it's all right to doubt these things regardless of emotion?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And one of the reasons I started off talking about the way we feel when we doubt is one thing that I think is often not discussed very much is the role of emotion in our education. And even the very idea that emotion and reason are two separate things. This is another area I've been really interested in. We tend to have this concept, and it goes back to Plato, that there is an emotional part of our mind and a reasoning part of our mind. But that's not really true, that those things are not necessarily separate. Our emotions are completely bound up in our reason, and our reason is very much based on our emotion in many ways. So it becomes a really interesting problem, what you've described, particularly when I think a lot of people have noted that things that have occurred in the world in the past 5 or so years have really driven people apart a lot, and people have kind of got into a position where they're protecting their own beliefs and they're not willing to listen to other people. Sometimes the idea that you can just convince somebody through sheer logic is missing the way that people actually are attached and the role that people's beliefs play in how they feel about themselves and how they see the world. So I think there's a lot of work being done now about, for example, with climate change, that it's not just a rational discussion between people, that it is something that is driven very much by people's emotions and values, and that we need to understand that if we're going to have open conversations. Great question, though.
Great question, May. Thank you very much. Let's take one last question, then we'll hear from James Curley, as always. Xiaohan Song, go ahead with your question.
Hear me?
Start again if you could, Xiaohan.
Okay. I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Wonderful, loud and clear.
I'd appreciate it. Well, you mentioned that your PhD research was based on a very interesting topic, which states that maybe our mind exists in the entire surrounding world. So I'd really appreciate it if you could share more about your understanding on the topic. Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks. So this idea. It's called the extended mind thesis. So it's thinking about how we define what a mind is. And one pathway into this way of understanding things is to think, well, when we're thinking about a mind, we're thinking about something that perhaps processes information or makes decisions or solves problems. So there's no real reason why that necessarily has to be bound by my skin or my skull. It doesn't necessarily have to be, a process doesn't have to just take place within one thing. And the other thing is that we notice when we are working in the world, the way I'm set up here now, I have, not that I didn't end up using them much, but I have notes set up in front of me. We all use our phones all the time. We rely on them as part of our memory to retrieve information from. Other people become part of our thinking processes in many ways. So this theory was really looking at how we might understand minds as things that are these extended and connected entities. There's some very good kind of discussions and podcasts. There's a fantastic Australian philosopher called David Chalmers, who's quite fun to watch. I think he did a TED talk on this if you're interested. And he talked about smartphones and how, you know, what would happen for many of us if our phone, we've all had that experience where our phone battery has run flat and it feels like we've lost part of our mind. We rely on these things so much that they become quite integrated. So the topic was about looking at that and looking at, you know, what level of integration between our brain processes and the external world do we need in order to think that perhaps our minds are not inside our heads and not inside our bodies? And as we mentioned before, talking about social connections as well and how that forms part of who we are.
Amazing stuff there. Look, if we could squeeze in one last question and then we'll go to James. And it's from Saif. Saif, who I believe posed the idea that aliens existed. Saif, go ahead.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I just wanted to ask, I hear the phrase illusion of free will a lot in my life. So I wanted to ask if free will really is an illusion or is it real?
Oh, Saif, you want me to be invited back for another Trinity talk? There's so many of you here. We do run at Trinity a philosophy club, actually, that we run sometimes where people talk, and this is one of our favorite topics to talk about in philosophy club, is free will an illusion? So when you start to, particularly for the scientifically minded amongst you, if you start to think about the world as something where we can understand the movement of every atom or molecule in the universe as being causally determined by laws of physics, along with where it is and where it's been, it starts to look like we have a kind of determination of the physical world. Not everybody believes this. People think that there might be stochastic or random processes or quantum processes. But even then, there's a lot of reason to think that that our physical selves are in some way determined. So one of the worries that comes up, or one of the questions that comes up, is, does this mean that all of our actions are determined in some meaningful way? What does this mean for us understanding ourselves as free agents? That is a lot I can't really answer right now, apart from the fact this is a very good philosophical question. Some people think we can have both. Many people, like Daniel Dennett is very interesting on this, think that we are perhaps thinking about what free will really is in the wrong way, that we need to question our assumptions about what we really want from free will. Fantastic question though, Saif.
Saif, and indeed all of the other participants tonight, if this has prompted your thinking, if this idea of the ability to question and being exploring ideas, Trinity College, part of our core curriculum is the history of ideas subject, and it prepares students with those skills before heading off into all disciplines at Melbourne University, and is one of the reasons why our students are always recognised amongst the top performing students at Melbourne University. And that's based on Melbourne University research itself, because the core curriculum program at Trinity College. James Curley's emerged from the Q&A room. James, any questions from...
Look, we had a lot, Ben, and Dr. Alicia, thank you for that. That was fascinating. I find this stuff absolutely enthralling. We had a lot of questions and comments in the Q&A. I saw the chat section was buzzing also with some great contributions. So you've certainly stimulated a lot of thought. And I think the great takeaway from this is it sort of reveals that across all the disciplines, these are the kind of things that you start thinking about in preparation for university study. So it's kind of, after a session with you, it's quite clear why we teach this as our core subject, one of our core subjects, and why it's so essential for all students preparing for university. I'm just putting into the chat now our email address, just in case there are students that want to contact us later on in the week. You might have thought of other questions to ask about Trinity. I can't answer too many of the questions about philosophy, I'm afraid, but there's the email address there. By all means, contact us and have a look at our website. We've got one more. Ben will tell us about what our final lecture is next week, but it's been a joy working with you again tonight. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you very much, James. And you'll see James again for the last time this year, next week. Before I tell you about next week, let's put our virtual hands together, some comments into the chat. Thank you very much, Dr. Alicia, for an amazing lecture. It's fantastic and
Thank you very
really,
much for listening.
really thought-provoking. Students, one more in the Trinity Talks series coming up next Monday, the 1st of November. What a journey it's been so far. And next week, we're finishing it off with a really fun and engaging look at media and communications, and more particularly about the role of Asian cinema. Okay, the role of Asian cinema and how it has influenced Hollywood. Okay, so that's coming up next week. If you haven't already registered for it, places are limited, so do get on and register. We're looking forward to seeing you next week. Again, if you have any questions about applying for Trinity College, we're taking lots of applications at the moment for the February programs and indeed for the mid-year programs 2022. 2022 is looking really positive, really bright. We hope to see you in Melbourne at some stage. But until then, we'll see you next week. Bye for now and see you then.
Thanks, everyone.